Happy Halloween, and welcome to this very special Halloween 90 Nostalgia trip, where we're going to take a look at the conclusion to the new Halloween trilogy of films, helmed by director David Gordon Green and starring Jamie Lee Curtis, who returned to the role of Laurie Strode back in 2018. Now, just for a little background, the original 1978 Halloween is my all-time favorite horror film, and was pretty much my introduction to the genre as a little kid. When the first of these Halloween reboot films came out back in 2018, it was my very first time seeing a Halloween film in theaters, so the overall theater experience was pretty incredible for me, even though the movie itself was just what I would call pretty solid. I know a lot of fans hated the sequel, Halloween Kills, but for me, I found it to be okay, though it was definitely a step down from the slower, more suspenseful feel that Halloween 2018 had. Kills just felt more like a modern, blood-soaked slaughterfest, and while the kills were visually awesome, the execution of the story wasn't as good as the ideas. So going into seeing Ends, I've tried to keep my expectations at a minimum. My hope was that they'd lean back more towards suspense and atmosphere like 2018 did. Not that it needed to be loaded with as much nostalgia and references, but I at least wanted it to feel more of a throwback to the original film, without outright copying it or constantly referencing it. Obviously, with this being promoted as the quote-unquote end of Halloween, and of the story of Laurie Strode and Michael Myers, I went in hoping for a fascinating and exciting finale to this trilogy, and at least an acceptable ending for this story that I've loved for so many years. So how does Halloween Ends turn out? Well, without spoiling anything just yet, I will say, if you're a fan of this franchise and of either of the previous two installments in this trilogy, and you want to know if this one is worth making the trip to a theater, or if you're better off staying at home and checking it out while it's streaming on Peacock, I would definitely say, if you're a hardcore fan of the franchise, light up some Halloween decorations, shut out the lights, and check it out from the comfort of your home on streaming. If you're a more casual horror fan and don't really have too much of a personal investment in this series, I'd go for the theater experience. Now, those statements might not make a whole lot of sense to anyone who hasn't yet seen this film, but once you see it, you may understand where I'm coming from. Halloween Ends is probably the most unique and out-of-left-field Halloween film in the entire franchise. And considering some of the crap we've gotten from past Halloween movies, that's saying a lot. I think a good way to sum up what you're going to get from this movie comes from the opening credit sequence. It's clearly an homage to the other film in this franchise that is totally out of left field and different, and that's Halloween 3: Season of the Witch. Let that be your first clue that whatever you may have been expecting from Ends should go right, well, into the grinder. Whether you liked this film or hated it, I think you have to give credit to David Gordon Green for having the balls to make a Halloween movie this different from the norm, especially as the final film in the series. I think if you look at Halloween Ends as a standalone film, it honestly works really well. The problem is that this isn't a standalone film. It's supposed to be the final part of a trilogy of connected films. Ends just feels nothing like Halloween 2018 or Halloween Kills. The story basically starts over and goes in totally new directions with brand new characters, and the central plot of the story for this entire trilogy kind of just takes a back seat for it. The response to this film so far has been incredibly divisive, and for once, I can actually understand it. This is not a film for people looking for a straightforward Michael Myers slasher. In fact, Michael Myers himself is not in much of the film at all. Ironically, this is the same aspect of Halloween 3 that has always made it a lightning rod for fanboy rage. And as is the case with Halloween 3, if you can get past that, you can find some enjoyment in the story. Now, unlike Kills, this movie I think really has interesting ideas that are mostly executed well. Yes, there are lots of way too convenient moments where characters just so happen to be at the right place at the right time, and yes, there are some very questionable decisions made in crucial story moments. I just don't think that they're reaching the level of ruining the movie for me. There aren't these noticeable, gigantic plot holes that make it impossible to follow things in any way. Now, if there are, and I'm just missing them, feel free to let me know down in the comments because, like I said, this is all just based on my first watch. These are initial impressions. I haven't watched it a second time yet, but I do plan to check it out again to see if any of my views change on it. Most of the story in Ends focuses on the characters of Laurie Strode, her granddaughter Allison, and new character Corey Cunningham, played by Rohan Campbell. While a lot of people will hate the direction and arc of this character, Rohan Campbell's performance as Corey, I think, really sells the story they're going for, and I honestly think he plays quite a hand in carrying the movie. It's a great performance that I think deserves recognition. I think the writing is also quite a step up from the previous two films, although, of course, there are still several cringe-inducing lines in there. It's mostly a very serious tone this time, though, with hardly any forced Danny McBride comedy thrown in, which is definitely one of the film's major positives. Because if there's one thing this trilogy has proven, it's that Danny McBride should never be allowed anywhere near a dramatic film script again. The pace is definitely much slower than Kills, and really takes its time setting up characters, again, mostly this new Corey character, before things really start to ramp up. This is another aspect that a lot of people have been blasting the movie for, and it's one I personally don't agree with. There's nothing wrong with a slow burn as long as the story is interesting, and I think for the most part, the story direction is interesting, and very different from what I was expecting, and that for me is something I'm fine with and open to. We've seen straightforward Halloween films. It's 2022 and I personally have no problem with a trip off the beaten path after all these years. I just wish this actually was its own thing, instead of having this new direction thrown into what's supposed to be a third part of a trilogy. It just frustrates me that anything good you could say about Halloween Ends is bound to be overshadowed by the fact that this is just so far from what people wanted or anticipated. It's hard to defend this different direction when it really has no business being the final chapter of a series. An ambitious idea like this should be the beginning of a series or a trilogy, not just like shoehorned into the end of one. I do honestly think that with time, people will gain an appreciation and a respect for it, much as how fans have finally started to appreciate Season of the Witch over time, and rightfully so. The unfortunate part, though, is that I can't see myself ever watching all three of these films back to back, because this one just feels like it doesn't fit in at all. It needs to be said, though, that this doesn't make Halloween Ends a bad horror film, because it's honestly not. But it does leave room to argue that it's a bad Halloween film, and a bad way to end this trilogy. I can understand liking it or hating it for those reasons. Now, as for the ending, before we get into spoilers, I'll say the ending of Halloween Ends is kind of a mixed bag for me. For years now, I've thought about what ways they could possibly quote-unquote end this story, and the way things go down here is probably one of the few directions left they haven't gone in. I think it'll take me some more time and more viewings to really iron out how I feel about it, but I can't help but feel a bit let down by how low-key it is. It's not this big, exciting, poetic, goosebump-inducing conclusion I was hoping for, though it is nice to finally see Laurie and Michael battling it out one last time, even though it does kind of take forever to get there. It's definitely not the way I would have ended it, but from the sounds of it, David Gordon Green had a hard time with it too, as he apparently changed the ending at least 4 different times before settling on this one we've got. That's in addition to the fact that a huge chunk of footage shown in the trailers leading up to the release are nowhere to be found in the final cut. I can't stand it when movies do this, as it's just the lowest form of deception towards your audience. The whole movie was promoted around Michael versus Laurie, but that aspect of the film boils down to about 10 minutes of the entire hour and 50-minute runtime. I said it's possible to enjoy the film even with the lack of Michael, but for me personally, there really should have been more Michael and Laurie together. You can have all the other Corey plot you want, but you shouldn't sidebar the very thing you built your entire promotional campaign around. Even in a recent interview, David Gordon Green himself said they never set out to make a movie all about Laurie versus Michael, which is absolutely mind-blowing considering All of the promotion was literally Michael versus Laurie. How can you possibly say that was never your intention? It's absolutely insane to me. Bottom line is, if you're a hardcore Halloween fan, kill off your expectations and don't expect a straightforward slasher film. You're probably gonna hate it if you don't. Now, if you have low expectations and are open to seeing something a bit unusual and outside of the box for a modern Halloween film, you just might be pleasantly surprised. So now briefly we'll dive into some spoilers regarding the ending, so if you don't want to ruin anything for yourself, check out the movie and come on back here for my final thoughts. So, the end of the film sees Laurie slashing Michael's throat and wrists with a knife. Then we see him tied to the roof of a car as the entire town of Haddonfield has this bizarre funeral procession, bringing the body of the Shape to this junkyard that was featured several times in the movie, where his body is decisively and gruesomely dropped into a big-ass grinder. It's literally the most definitive and final death we have ever seen for Michael, even more so than chopping his head off in H2O. It honestly felt really weird seeing this go down, and this is coming from someone who is totally on board with killing him off for good in the story. I just can't help but feel like it just didn't totally land for me. I don't know if it's just that deep down I don't want Michael to be gone for good, or if it was just anticlimactic to have him just get his throat and wrist cut after everything he's done. It's something I'm gonna have to think on for a while, but I'm really curious as to your guys' thoughts and opinions on this as a final death for Michael Myers. It's pretty obvious that this franchise is not gone for good, nor is the character of Michael Myers. But was this a satisfying end for the Shape after over 40 years? Is this truly a satisfying final chapter for the character of Laurie Strode? Personally, I just don't know yet. I will say though, that final shot of the film, showing the different locations of the movie brightly lit and quiet, finally absent of Michael's breathing, in contrast to that iconic final shot of the original, was a pretty great touch in my opinion. I think we also have to give a big shout out to James Jude Courtney, who I think did an absolutely phenomenal job portraying the Shape, Michael Myers, for these past 3 films. In my view, he made the character his own while also perfectly carrying on the intimidating legacy of the OG, Nick Castle. We couldn't have asked for a better performance, both in the mask and out of it. In my humble opinion, he killed it. And of course, we all have to shout out the ultimate final girl herself, Jamie Lee Curtis, for coming back to the role that launched her career over 40 years ago. She showed us fans just how much Laurie has meant to the world of horror, and no matter how you feel about these new movies, there will only ever be one Laurie Strode, and I wouldn't want it any other way. I'm grateful for the final goodbye to this character. I'm also grateful for John Carpenter, giving us some incredible musical scores to go along with these films as well. The very fact that he decided to return to produce and score these movies meant so much to me as a fan. I honestly never want to see another Halloween film that doesn't have John Carpenter's hand somewhere on the keys. So as this 2022 Halloween season comes to an end, as well as this franchise for the time being, I'd love to know what you guys think of the film down in the comments below, and I hope you'll hit that like button and subscribe for more 90s Nostalgia trips to come. While the story of Halloween and Michael Myers may have come to an end for the time being, in the words of Laurie Strode, evil never dies, it only changes shape. And by the way, thank you guys so much for helping me hit 1,000 subscribers. You guys are amazing, and I'm so thankful for all of you who watch the videos, like, comment, and subscribe. I love interacting with you guys. You're all awesome, and I hope you have an amazing, happy, and safe Halloween. And I will see you very soon for the next 90s Nostalgia trip.